There is something about Keanu Reeves that stays with you long after you have seen his movies or heard his interviews. It is not just his talent or his fame. It is the way he carries himself through life with a quiet grace that feels rare in a world filled with noise. He has faced unimaginable loss, heartbreak that would break most people, and yet he moves through this world with kindness in his eyes and gentleness in his voice. He does not seek attention for his generosity. He does not demand recognition for his pain. He simply lives, loves, and gives without asking for anything in return. That is why he inspires me. That is why his story matters. And today, I want to share with you a tale about a connection so pure, so quietly powerful, that it reminds us what love and respect truly mean when they exist without conditions or expectations. The evening air carried a softness that seemed to settle over everything like a gentle blanket, and somewhere in the distance, the fading light of the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose that no artist could ever truly capture. There was a stillness in the moment, the kind that makes you pause without knowing exactly why, as if the world itself was holding its breath for something beautiful to unfold. Sandra stood near the edge of the wrap party, her glass untouched in her hand, and she felt something shift inside her chest, a flutter of emotion she could not quite name or understand. The laughter and music around her seemed to fade into a distant hum, and for a moment, she was aware only of her own heartbeat in the strange sense that this night would somehow change everything. She did not know yet what was coming. She only knew that something in the air felt different, felt alive with possibility and gentle uncertainty. The filming had ended just days before, and everyone was celebrating the completion of a project that had pushed them all to their limits. Sandra had spent weeks working alongside Keanu, sharing scenes that required trust and vulnerability, and somewhere along the way, something had shifted between them. She had noticed the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. She had felt the warmth of his presence during their long conversations between takes. But neither of them had ever spoken about it, as if acknowledging it out loud would somehow break the delicate magic that existed in the spaces between their words. Keanu stood across the room, surrounded by crew members who wanted to thank him and shake his hand. But his eyes kept drifting towards Sandra, and each time he looked at her, he felt a pull in his chest that he had been trying to ignore for weeks. He had worked with many talented people throughout his career, but there was something about her that was different. She was genuine in a world that often rewarded fakeness. She was kind when she did not have to be. She laughed with her whole heart and listened as if every word you spoke actually mattered. And he had fallen for her, quietly and completely, without ever planning to. The moment changed when a reporter appeared out of nowhere, camera flashing aggressively as he pushed through the crowd toward them. The man had a hungry look in his eyes, the kind that cared nothing for privacy or respect, only for the headline he could sell by morning. He positioned himself between Keanu and Sandra, his voice loud and demanding as he asked the question that everyone in Hollywood seemed obsessed with. He wanted to know if they were dating. He wanted confirmation of the rumors. He wanted something he could twist into a story that would follow them for months. Sandra felt her stomach tighten with discomfort. She hated these moments, hated feeling like her life was not her own, like every genuine emotion had to be performed or defended for public consumption. She opened her mouth to respond with something polite but dismissive, something that would make him go away without causing a scene. But before she could speak, she felt Keanu step closer to her, his presence warm and reassuring at her side. He smiled at the reporter with a calmness that seemed to confuse the man, and then he did something unexpected. He gently placed his arm around Sandra and announced that they were actually about to leave for a date right now. His voice was playful but sincere, and when Sandra looked up at him in surprise, she saw a mischievous glint in his eyes that made her heart skip. She understood immediately what he was doing. He was giving them both an escape, a way out of this uncomfortable moment and into something that felt like freedom. She played along without hesitation, smiling warmly as she confirmed his words. The reporter looked stunned, unsure whether he had just gotten the scoop of his career or been masterfully outmaneuvered. Before he could ask another question, Keanu guided Sandra toward the exit, his hand resting gently on her back as they slipped away from the party and into the cool evening air outside. The streets were quieter than Sandra expected, and she found herself laughing as they walked, the tension of the party melting away with each step. She asked him where they were going, genuinely curious about this spontaneous adventure he had created. Keanu smiled and told her to trust him, and something about the way he said it made her believe him completely. They ended up at a tiny taco stand on a street Sandra had never noticed before, despite living in this city for years. The place was nearly empty, with plastic chairs and a single flickering light that gave everything a warm, golden glow. It was the opposite of every fancy restaurant she had ever been taken to by men who wanted to impress her with their wealth or connections. And somehow, that made it perfect. They sat across from each other, eating tacos and talking about everything and nothing. Sandra found herself opening up in ways she rarely did, sharing stories from her childhood, her fears about the future, her dreams that felt too fragile to speak out loud. Keanu listened with an attention that made her feel truly seen, not as an actress or a celebrity, but as a person with a heart that sometimes felt too heavy to carry alone. And then the conversation shifted to something deeper. Sandra took a breath and admitted something she had been holding inside for weeks. She told him that she had developed feelings for him during the filming, a crush that had grown stronger with every passing day. She laughed nervously as she said it, expecting him to brush it off or change the subject. But instead, he went quiet, and she watched as something moved across his face, an emotion he seemed to be wrestling with internally. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and sincere. He told her that he had felt the same way. He had noticed her from the very first day and had found himself falling for her more deeply than he had anticipated. But he had made a choice not to act on it, not because he did not care, but because he cared too much. Sandra felt confusion wash over her. She asked him why he had never said anything, why he had kept this hidden when they both clearly felt the same connection. His answer surprised her in ways she was not prepared for. Keanu explained that he had seen too many relationships in Hollywood that started fast and burned out just as quickly. He had watched people confuse chemistry on set with real love, only to realize too late that they had built something on a foundation that could not hold. He did not want that with her. He respected her too much to risk making her feel like she was just another co-star, another temporary connection in a life filled with temporary things. If something was going to happen between them, he wanted it to be real. He wanted it to be built on something that would last. Sandra felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened to him speak. In all her years in this industry, no one had ever shown her this kind of consideration. Men had pursued her aggressively, men had made grand gestures designed to impress, but no one had ever stepped back out of respect for her heart and her future. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her, and he had done it by doing nothing at all. They walked together after that, along empty streets that felt like they belonged only to them. They talked about loneliness and the masks that fame forces people to wear. They talked about how rare it is to find someone who sees the real you beneath all the noise and expectation. And with every word, Sandra felt herself falling deeper into a connection that defied everything she thought she knew about love. When they finally reached her door, the moment arrived that felt inevitable. The perfect ending to a perfect night. The kiss that movies always promised. Sandra felt her heart racing as she waited for him to lean in, to complete this story the way stories are supposed to end. But Keanu did not kiss her. Instead, he took her hand gently in his and looked into her eyes with an expression that held more love than any kiss ever could. He told her that he would rather protect what they had than risk losing her to something they were not ready for. He called her the most extraordinary person he had met in this town and said he wanted her in his life for life, not for a headline, not for a moment, but for all the moments yet to come. Sandra felt something break open inside her chest, but it was not pain. It was relief. It was recognition. It was the feeling of being truly valued for who she was rather than what she could offer. She squeezed his hand and told him that he would have her, for life, just as he asked. The years that followed proved that their connection was not a passing thing. They never dated. They never kissed. The world kept asking questions and making assumptions, but they held on to something that transcended the categories people tried to put them in. They remained the closest of friends, showing up for each other in ways that mattered most. And then came a time when Sandra faced one of the darkest periods of her life. She lost someone she loved deeply, and the grief that followed threatened to consume her entirely. She retreated from the world, unsure how to carry the weight of so much sorrow. And during those quiet, devastating days, Keanu appeared at her door. He did not come with cameras or grand gestures. He came with food and a willingness to simply be present. He sat with her children when she did not have the strength. He listened when she needed to talk and sat in comfortable silence when she did not. He asked for nothing in return. He expected no recognition or praise. He was simply there, a steady presence in the midst of chaos, a reminder that she was not alone. When a reporter eventually asked Sandra what Keanu meant to her, she paused for a long time before answering. Her words carried the weight of decades and the depth of a connection that most people never get to experience. She said that he was the only man who loved her enough not to rush her. He respected her enough to wait, and he never asked for anything in return. One pretend date had turned into 30 real years of friendship, trust, and unconditional support. He had taught her that love does not have to be loud or claimed or performed. It just has to be true. Somewhere across town, Keanu read those words in an interview. He smiled softly to himself, the kind of smile that comes from a heart at peace with its choices. He picked up his phone and sent her a simple message with just 2 words. Taco Tuesday. Her response came back almost instantly. Always. And in that single exchange, there was everything. A lifetime of respect. A bond that never wavered. A love that chose patience over passion and presence over possession. They had built something that could not be named or categorized, something that existed outside the rules that usually govern relationships. And it was more beautiful than any romance the movies could ever capture. This story reminds us of something we often forget in our rush to find love and connection. Sometimes the deepest bonds are the ones we do not force into existence. Sometimes respect means stepping back when every part of you wants to step forward. Sometimes love is not about claiming someone as your own but about giving them the space to become who they are meant to be. Keanu and Sandra teach us that kindness without expectation is one of the rarest gifts we can offer another person. They show us that patience is not weakness but strength, and that true connection does not fade with time when it is built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care. In a world that often celebrates the fast and the dramatic, their story is a quiet rebellion. It says that love can be gentle. It says that friendship can be profound. It says that the most meaningful relationships are sometimes the ones that never fit neatly into the boxes we have been taught to expect. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that being there for someone, truly and consistently, is worth more than any grand romantic gesture could ever be. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Love the people in your life with patience and respect. Show up for them not when it is convenient but when it matters most. And remember that some connections are so sacred that they do not need labels or definitions to be real. They just need 2 people who choose each other, again and again, through all the seasons of life. That is the kind of love worth waiting for. That is the kind of love worth protecting. And that is the kind of love that Keanu and Sandra have quietly shown the world is possible.